The predator world was a place of silence, not because it was peaceful, but because fear had stolen every voice. Once, these predators were hunters who ruled their wild lands with claws and teeth. Now they were chained, forced to kneel in lines like broken animals. The overlords, tall and cruel, had stripped them of pride and freedom. For years, the predators only bowed their heads and obeyed, because to resist meant death. Hope was a word no one remembered. That hopeless rhythm broke one evening. A loud roar came from the sky, like thunder tearing the heavens apart. Every predator lifted its head in shock. Something fiery crossed the clouds, burning brighter than the twin suns. It was not one of the overlord's sleek warships. This one was damaged, screaming as it fell, before smashing into the wasteland just beyond the fortress walls. The ground shook, and dust rose high into the air. The predators, still chained, stared. They whispered among themselves, their voices hoarse from years of silence. "Another slave ship?" one muttered. "No," another replied, sniffing the air. "This smells different." From the wreck came a figure, alone, small, human. His clothes were torn, his face cut and bruised, yet his steps were steady. He carried no weapon, no armor, yet he walked as if no force in the galaxy could make him bow. The overlords laughed when they saw him. "A human?" they mocked. "A fragile creature from a fragile world." Guards shoved him toward the courtyard, where the predators crouched in their chains. They expected him to fall, to collapse into the dirt. But the human did not. Even wounded, he stood tall. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but his eyes burned with something the predators had not seen in years. Defiance. The overlords ordered him to kneel. Their voices were sharp, their whips ready. The predators, watching silently, knew what would happen. Every slave kneeled eventually. It was the rule of survival. But the human only stared back. He did not bend his knee. He did not lower his head. He simply stood. The guards struck him across the back. He stumbled but caught himself. Another blow, harder this time. Blood streaked his skin, but still he stood. The predator's eyes widened. They had seen many fall on the first strike, but this one refused. It was madness. It was impossible. A young predator whispered, "Why does he resist? Does he not know he will die?" An older one, his chains rusted with age, rasped back, "He knows. That is why it matters." The overseers grew angry. They barked louder, demanding submission. The human's jaw tightened. His lip bled, his hands shook, but his back stayed straight. In the silence of the courtyard, the predators felt their hearts beat faster. For the first time in years, they were not looking at their masters. They were looking at someone who refused to be broken. The guards circled him, striking again and again. Each time, the human staggered but rose. His body weakened, but his will only grew stronger. His silence became heavier than the overseer's shouting. Every predator watched, their claws twitching against the chains, their teeth grinding as something long buried stirred inside them. Hope. The human did not speak. He didn't need to. His actions shouted louder than words. "I will not kneel." When the sun sank and shadows stretched long across the courtyard, the overseers threw him to the ground. They believed they had humiliated him, but the predators saw something else. Even in the dirt, he pushed himself up to one knee, then back to his feet. He stood once more, taller than before. The overseers turned away, pretending victory, but their voices shook with unease. They had broken countless species. Why did this one human feel unbreakable? That night, the predators could not sleep. Chains rattled softly as they whispered in the darkness. "He does not fear them," one murmured. "He fights without claws, without weapons, and still he stands." Another voice, older and heavier, said what none dared to admit. "Maybe he is what we have been waiting for." The human lay in the corner, his body battered, his face shadowed. Yet even in pain, he did not curl into despair. He rested like a warrior preparing for another battle. The predators, watching him through the gloom, felt something in their hearts shift. For the first time in years, they dreamed not of death or slavery, but of freedom. And they dreamed because of him. The human who had arrived not as a savior, not as a master, but as someone who refused to kneel when everyone else already had. It was only the beginning, but the predators knew. Tomorrow would not be the same. The night after the crash was restless. Chains rattled softly as predators shifted in their sleep, though most did not sleep at all. Their eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, kept drifting toward the corner where the human rested. His body was battered, his skin cut in many places, yet he still held himself like someone who refused defeat. He had no weapons, no allies, and no way to escape, yet he carried a quiet strength that unsettled both slaves and masters alike. By morning, the overseers dragged him back into the courtyard. The sun was harsh, casting long shadows over the chained predators who crouched in rows. The human stood in the center, his wrists bound tightly, his head bowed for a moment. But then he lifted his face. His eyes locked with those of the predators watching, and something invisible passed between them. A silent promise that he would not kneel. The overlords surrounded him with laughter. Their voices echoed off the stone walls. "This fragile creature dares resist," one sneered. "Let him entertain us. Let the predators see what happens when one refuses the order." The predators expected the human to be beaten again. That was how these stories always ended. But instead, the overlords made a different choice. They ordered the guards to test him in another way, to fight. From the far side of the courtyard, a beast was dragged out. It was not a predator, but a monstrous hound bred by the overlords for cruelty. Its body was covered in metal plates, and its eyes glowed red. The predators hissed low in their throats. They had seen this beast tear through their own kind many times. The human had no chance. The guards untied his wrists, throwing him a broken spear shaft. It was more mockery than a weapon. The human gripped it, steadying himself, while the hound snarled and lunged forward. The predators leaned forward in their chains, hearts pounding. They did not want to watch, yet they could not look away. The hound charged, jaws snapping. The human sidestepped, the spear shaft scraping across the beast's hide. It was not enough to wound, but it showed control, precision. He was not flailing, he was thinking. The predators noticed this at once. The overseers laughed, but the sound was strained. The human circled the beast, his movements sharp despite his injuries. When the hound leapt again, he shoved the shaft into its open jaws, forcing its head sideways. The beast stumbled, and the courtyard gasped. Even the predators, beaten into silence for years, felt their breath catch. The fight dragged on. The human was thrown down, scratched and bitten, but he rose again and again. His spear broke in half, yet he used the splintered wood like a blade. When the beast lunged a final time, he rolled beneath it, driving the wood into a weak joint in its armor. The hound howled and collapsed, defeated. The courtyard fell into silence. The predators stared wide-eyed. They had seen many struggle. They had seen many fall. But never had they seen a lone human, weaponless and chained the night before, bring down one of the overlord's hounds. For a long moment no one moved. Then, quietly, a predator whispered, "He fights not just to live. He fights for something more." Another whispered back, "Maybe he fights for us." The overseers were furious. Instead of proving the human's weakness, the fight had shown his strength. They shouted orders, dragging him back with chains, but their voices trembled. The predators could smell it. The overseers were afraid. As the human was forced to his corner once more, his eyes lifted toward the predators still bound in chains. He did not speak, but his gaze lingered on them, steady and unyielding. For the first time in years, the predators felt their hearts burn. Not with fear, but with the faint heat of courage. That night, whispers spread across the courtyard. The predators, once silent, spoke again. "Did you see him? He stood against the hound. He should have fallen, but he did not. He is only one, yet he stands taller than all of us." The oldest among them, scarred and half-blind, lifted his head and said softly, "We have forgotten who we are, but that human, he remembers." The predators fell quiet after that, each one thinking of the chains around their necks. They had accepted them for so long that the metal felt like part of their bodies. But now, with the image of the human standing tall against the beast, they felt the weight of those chains more sharply than ever. Some tugged at their bonds in the darkness, claws scratching against metal. The chains held, but for the first time, the predators pulled not with despair, but with the thought, what if these chains could break? The human lay silently in his corner, eyes closed, body aching. Yet even in sleep, his hands clenched into fists. And the predators, though still chained, began to believe that tomorrow might not belong to the overlords. It was a dangerous thought, but it was alive, and it had begun with him. The morning began with the sharp clang of chains and the angry shouts of the overseers. The predators, half awake, lifted their heads in silence. They knew the sound. It meant punishment, it meant cruelty, it meant another display of power. But this day already felt different. The human, who had survived the beast the day before, was dragged back into the courtyard. His body was bruised, his skin torn in several places, but he walked on his own. His shoulders were straight, his head unbowed. The predators stared at him, their glowing eyes fixed. For years, nothing had broken the monotony of their slavery. Now, each time the human appeared, they felt the silence stir with something dangerous. Hope. The overlords wanted to crush that hope before it spread. They ordered a cruel test. This time, the human would not fight a beast. This time, he would fight for the amusement of the masters themselves. The human was shoved into the center of the courtyard, chains still heavy around his wrists. For guards stepped forward, armored and armed with long shock blades. They circled him slowly, their smiles sharp and mocking. Around them, predators crouched in their lines, forced to watch. The overseers shouted to the human, "Kneel now, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will suffer until death." The predators waited, their hearts heavy. They had seen this scene too many times. Slaves always broke. Kneeling was survival. No one could fight against 4 armed guards with nothing but chains on his wrists. But the human did not kneel. Instead, he lifted his head, his gaze sweeping across the courtyard. His eyes met those of the chained predators. He did not speak, but his message was clear. I will not bow. The first guard lunged, blade crackling with energy. The human sidestepped and grabbed the chain on his wrist, whipping it around the guard's arm. With a sharp pull, he threw the guard off balance. The courtyard echoed with a metallic clang as the blade hit the ground. Gasps escaped the predators' throats, their voices breaking the silence for the first time in years. The other 3 rushed forward. The human moved quickly, dodging strikes, using his chains as weapons. Each movement was desperate yet precise. He was not stronger than the guards, but he was faster, smarter, unpredictable. His strikes were not wild, they carried purpose. The predators' eyes widened as they watched. They had forgotten what strategy looked like, what it meant to fight with more than muscle. This human fought like he had been doing it his whole life, every motion sharp and fearless. One guard struck him across the back, sparks flying as the shock blade made contact. The human fell to his knees for an instant. The predators tensed, thinking it was over. But slowly, painfully, he rose again. He turned his head toward the guards, blood on his lip, and smiled. That smile rippled through the courtyard like lightning. It was not the smile of someone broken. It was the smile of defiance. The predators began to whisper, voices trembling. He stood again. He smiles in the face of death. Not even our strongest dared this. The fight raged on. The human snatched up the dropped shock blade, spinning it awkwardly in his hands. He fought back, his strikes fueled by fury. One guard fell, then another. The overseers shouted in anger, their voices sharp with panic. This was no longer entertainment, it was rebellion. The predators felt their chains digging into their flesh as their hearts pounded. They wanted to move, to rise, to join him. For so long, they had stayed down because they believed resistance was useless. But now they saw it with their own eyes. Resistance lived. The last guard struck the human hard across the chest, sending him crashing against the courtyard wall. Dust rose around him. The predators held their breath. For a moment silence fell again. Then the dust cleared. The human stood, bruised, bleeding, barely able to breathe. But he stood. His hand gripped the shock blade. His eyes burned with fire. The predators erupted in low growls, their voices rising without permission. It was not a roar yet, but it was more sound than had come from them in years. The overseers spun in fury, shouting at the predators to be silent. But the whispers did not stop. The predators were no longer watching in despair. They were watching with hunger. Hunger for freedom. The human raised the weapon, pointing it at the overseers. His voice, hoarse but clear, broke the silence. No more chains. The predators shivered at the sound of his words. They had not heard such a declaration in a lifetime. The overseers rushed forward, striking him down with electric whips until he collapsed unconscious. The guards dragged him back into the shadows, leaving the predators behind. The courtyard fell silent again. But it was not the same silence as before. Something had changed. The predators looked at each other with wide eyes. Their claws scratched at the dirt. Their chests heaved with restless breath. They felt the weight of their chains more than ever. And deep in their hearts, one dangerous thought had been planted. If he can stand, maybe so can we. That night, when the overseers retreated into the fortress, the predators did not sleep. They replayed the moment over and over, the human standing tall, smiling even as blood dripped down his face, whispering words that still rang in their ears. No more chains. It was only 3 words. But for the predators, it was enough to light a fire they thought had died long ago. And once fire takes root, it cannot be unseen. The courtyard smelled of blood and smoke. The overseers believed they had ended the spectacle by beating the human into silence, dragging him away as if he were nothing more than a stubborn animal. But the predators knew better. They had seen his fire, his refusal to kneel, his voice declaring, "No more chains." Those words did not fade with the night. They echoed in every predator's heart, loud as a war drum. When morning came, the predators were restless. Chains rattled not because of punishment, but because claws scratched against iron. Their eyes followed every movement of the guards with a sharpness the overseers had not noticed in years. The predators did not dare speak openly, but their silence was no longer empty. It was charged, alive. Then the human returned. He was dragged into the courtyard again, bruised and bloody, but his stride was steady. The overseers mocked him, their laughter loud, but there was unease behind their smiles. They had punished him, yet he still walked with dignity. His back was straight. His head was high. The predators stirred. Their chains rattled louder this time. Something invisible passed between them. They were waiting, though they did not know for what. The overseers ordered another display. The human was to fight again, but this time he was not alone. Predator, still chained, was thrown forward. The overseers laughed, forcing slave against slave for their amusement. "Fight!" they commanded. "Let one live. Let one die." The predators froze. They knew what was expected. When forced, they always obeyed. It was survival. But the human shook his head. He stepped in front of the chained predator, raising his arms as if to shield him. The overseers shouted in fury. The guards struck him, demanding he obey. But he did not. Every strike he took was in defiance. His body staggering, yet his spirit unbroken. The predator behind him stared, stunned. No one had ever stood between an overlord's order and a slave before. The human turned his head slightly, meeting the predator's gaze. No words passed between them, but the meaning was clear. You are not alone. The predators watching could not stay silent anymore. Low growls spread through the courtyard, deep and rumbling. The overseers spun, shouting for silence. But the growls grew louder. For the first time in years, predators were voicing anger. Then it happened. One predator, a young one with chains biting into his flesh, pulled hard. His muscles trembled, veins bulging, as he yanked against iron links. For a moment it seemed useless. But then snap! One shackle broke loose. The sound echoed like thunder. The courtyard froze. The overseers turned in shock, their faces pale with rage. Guards rushed toward the young predator, but before they could strike, another predator howled and yanked his chains. Snap! Another shackle shattered. The predators erupted. For too long they had bowed. For too long they had believed chains were eternal. But now, with the humans standing tall, something inside them had changed. Their muscles surged with fury. Their roars filled the courtyard. Chains broke one after another, metal clashing against stone as the predators tore themselves free. The overseers panicked. "Stop them!" they screamed. But the guards were already overwhelmed. The human staggered forward, his body weak but his eyes blazing. He picked up a fallen shock blade and stood side by side with the freed predators. His voice, rough but commanding, cut through the chaos. "Stand together!" The predators roared as one, their voices shaking the ground. They attacked not with blind rage, but with unity. For the first time in their enslaved lives, they fought not as individuals but as a pack. A guard swung at the human, but a predator lunged in, intercepting the strike. Another predator tore the weapon from a guard's hands and passed it to the human. The overseers screamed in disbelief. The human had not ordered them, yet they followed him. Not because he demanded it, but because he had shown them what freedom looked like. Blood and fire filled the courtyard. Guards fell, chains shattered, and the predators rose taller with every passing moment. The overseers, once so proud, began to retreat, fear twisting their faces. In the center of it all, the human stood, surrounded by predators who no longer saw him as fragile. They saw him as something greater, not an overlord, not a master, an alpha. One predator, the same young one who had broken his chains first, dropped to one knee before the human. But it was not the kneel of submission, it was the kneel of respect. Others followed, lowering their heads in unison. The human looked at them, stunned. He had not come to lead. He had not come to command. But in their eyes he was already chosen. He had lit a fire that no overseer could ever extinguish. The courtyard, once filled with silence and despair, now thundered with roars of freedom. Chains lay broken on the ground, shining in the sunlight like the bones of the old world. And in that moment, every predator knew life had changed forever. The courtyard was no longer silent. It shook with roars, shouts, and the clash of steel against claws. The overseers, who once ruled through fear, now stumbled backward as the predators surged like a storm. Chains lay broken on the ground, their cold links glinting under the harsh light. What once bound them was now nothing but scattered reminders of slavery. The human stood at the center, blood still dripping from his wounds, a shock blade gripped tight in his hand. He was not the strongest among them, nor the tallest, but every predator's eyes turned to him as if he were the anchor of their fury. His voice had been only 3 words, "No more chains." Yet those words carried more weight than the overseer's endless commands. The guards fought with desperation. Their weapons crackled with electricity, cutting through air, but for the first time, they faced predators who were not cowering. The predators fought as if they had been born again. Their claws slashed through armor, their teeth sank deep, their roars shook the walls. Years of humiliation had been stored in their hearts like fire, and now, released, it burned hotter than any weapon. The overseers shouted orders, but panic filled their voices. They had never feared before. Now their fear was plain. The predators could smell it. The human could see it in their eyes. He shouted above the chaos, his voice hoarse but steady. "Together! Strike as one!" The predators obeyed. Not because of fear, not because of chains, but because they believed. They moved in unison, covering one another, tearing through the guards. Where one predator faltered, another stepped in. Where the human staggered, 2 predators shielded him, claws raised. The overseers had built an empire on breaking unity. Now that unity had returned, their empire began to crumble. The human led not by standing above them, but by standing with them. Every swing of his blade, every time he rose after being knocked down, reminded the predators that they were no longer slaves. They were a pack again, and packs were unstoppable. One guard lunged at the human from behind. A predator intercepted, slamming the guard into the wall so hard the stone cracked. Another predator snatched a weapon and hurled it to the human, who caught it midair and struck down an enemy in one fluid motion. The courtyard became a rhythm of movement, like a song of freedom sung with roars and steel. The overseers tried to retreat toward the gates, but the predators blocked their way. A young predator, the same one who had broken his chains first, bared his teeth and growled, "Run no more." The overseer froze, terror flooding his eyes. The battle stretched on, but it no longer felt uncertain. The predators had turned the tide. For the first time in years, they were winning. The overseer's pride shattered as their guards fell one after another, overwhelmed by the ferocity of those they once called slaves. At the heart of the chaos, the human stood tall. His body screamed with pain, yet his spirit carried him forward. Every predator saw him not as fragile, but as a flame burning against the darkness. And in that flame they saw themselves. Finally, the last guard fell, his weapon clattering to the ground. The courtyard grew quiet, but it was not the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence before a new roar. The predators looked around at one another, their chests heaving, their claws dripping. For a moment, they almost could not believe it. Chains lay broken, guards lay defeated, overseers cowered in corners like prey. Then slowly, a sound rose. A low growl at first, then louder, until it became a thunderous roar that shook the walls. Dozens of predators raised their heads to the sky, their voices joining together in a single cry of victory. The overseers trembled. They had always claimed to be untouchable. Now they stood small and weak, surrounded by those they had crushed for years. In the center, predators gathered around the human. Their eyes glowed with something greater than anger. It was respect. One by one, they lowered their heads, not as slaves, but as warriors honoring an alpha. The human looked at them, breathless, blade still in his hand. He had not asked for this. He had not wanted followers. But the truth was clear. They had chosen him. The battle was over, but the war was not. Beyond the walls, the overlords still ruled, their forces still vast. Yet here, in this broken courtyard, something greater than an army had been born. For the first time in living memory, the predators were free, and they had chosen a human as their alpha. The overseers, pale with fear, tried to speak, but the predators silenced them with growls. Their time of dominance was finished. The human raised his blade, not high but steady. His voice, though weary, carried across the courtyard. This is only the beginning. And every predator knew he was right. The battle had turned. The future had begun. The courtyard still smelled of iron and smoke. Chains lay scattered like bones of a dead age, and the walls bore the scratches of the fight that had turned everything upside down. The predators stood in silence, breathing heavy, their eyes fixed on the human who had refused to kneel. He was wounded, his clothes torn, his body trembling from exhaustion. Yet he stood straight, holding the broken shock blade in one hand. The predators lowered their heads one by one, not as slaves, but as warriors. It was not submission. It was respect. They had always known alphas in their packs, leaders chosen by strength, courage, and spirit. Now, without anyone saying it aloud, they had chosen their alpha. And he was human. The human looked around at them, confusion in his tired eyes. He had not asked for this. He had not expected it. To him, survival had been instinct, defiance had been natural. But to the predators, it was more. He had given them what no one else could, the will to stand. One predator, the young one who had broken his chains first, stepped forward. His voice was rough and used to speaking freely. "We follow." Others growled in agreement, a low rumble that shook the air. They were no longer whispering in fear. Their voices carried strength again. The overseers, cornered against the walls, shouted desperately, "He is not one of you. He is weak, he is human. You belong to us." The predators turned their glowing eyes on them, and the overseers' words died in their throats. No one believed their lies anymore. The chains were broken, and fear had shifted sides. The human raised a hand, stopping the predators before they tore the overseers apart. His voice was hoarse but firm. Not yet. We will fight, but not as they do. We fight together. We fight with honor. The predators stilled. His words sank deep, cutting through the chaos of their rage. Honor was something the overlords had tried to erase. Now, the human reminded them that it still lived. Slowly, the predators surrounded the overseers. But instead of tearing them down in blind fury, they forced them to their knees. The sight was powerful. Those who had ruled by chains now bent in fear before those they once enslaved. The human did not smile, nor did he boast. He only nodded once, then turned back to the predators. You are not beasts. You are not slaves. You are free. A roar erupted, louder than thunder, shaking the very stones of the fortress. The predators raised their heads to the sky, their voices joining as one. For the first time in memory, their cry was not of pain but of triumph. When the roar died down, the predators gathered around the human. They looked to him for guidance. For years they had been told what to do, where to stand, how to bow. Now they looked for something new, not orders born of fear, but a path born of choice. The human's gaze swept across them. Freedom is not given, he said slowly. It is taken. Today you took it. But beyond these walls, more of your kind still wear chains. More worlds suffer. The overlords will come again. They will try to break us. We must be ready. The predators listened, silent but burning with purpose. They understood. Freedom was only the first step. The war was far from over. That night, the courtyard changed. The predators no longer lay silent in chains. They stood tall, patrolling, guarding one another. The overseers, once untouchable, were now prisoners. And in the center, the human sat with the predators around him, a fire burning between them. They shared no feast, no celebration. They simply sat together, breathing the same air, feeling the same heat. For the predators, it was more than enough. For the first time, they felt like a pack again. The young predator who had first broken his chains leaned closer to the human. Alpha, he said softly, the word heavy with meaning. The human shook his head. I am not your alpha. You are free. You can choose your own path. But the predator growled low, his voice steady. We already chose. The others nodded, their glowing eyes reflecting the firelight. It was not something the human could refuse. Leadership was not always about desire. Sometimes it was about necessity. The human lowered his head, accepting silently. He did not feel like a leader. He felt tired, scarred, and small against the galaxy's cruelty. Yet when he looked at the predators, creatures once broken, now standing tall, he realized this was no longer just about him. It was about all of them. Above the fortress, the stars burned bright. Somewhere out there, the overlords gathered their armies, planning revenge. But here, on this night, a new bond had been forged. A bond between predators and a human, not of chains, but of trust. The predators had found their alpha, and the human, whether he wanted it or not, had found his pack. The night was restless, though no predator wished to close their eyes. They had spent too many years in silence, chained and bent under the weight of fear. Now, with the overseers tied and trembling in the corners of the courtyard, freedom was no longer a dream whispered in the dark. It was real. Yet even freedom carried questions. What now? What next? The human sat by the fire, his body weak but his spirit unbroken. Around him, predators gathered, their glowing eyes fixed on him. They had chosen him as alpha not because of force but because of the strength he carried inside. Still, he knew that tonight was only the beginning. The overlords would not accept defeat. They would return. And when they did, they would come with greater power, with weapons and armies to crush any spark of rebellion. The human's voice was low but steady as he spoke. You broke your chains, but the war is not over. Beyond these walls, your brothers and sisters are still bound. More worlds suffer under the same rule. If we stop here, the overlords will return, and they will put those chains back on your necks. The predators growled, their claws scratching against the stone. They knew he spoke the truth. Freedom could not survive if it belonged to one courtyard alone. The young predator who had been the first to break his chains stepped forward. His voice was rough but filled with fire. "We are ready. We fight. Not as slaves. Not as beasts. As free hunters." A roar rose from the others, echoing across the night. The sound shook the old fortress walls, carrying into the wasteland beyond. It was a sound the overseers had feared for years, the voice of predators unchained. At dawn, the human led them out of the courtyard. The fortress, once a prison, was now theirs. The overseers were left bound, forced to witness the fall of their rule. The predators carried weapons scavenged from fallen guards. The human walked at their center, not above them, but among them like one of their own. As they moved through the broken lands, predators from nearby pits and holding cells watched in shock. For years they had been chained, their spirits broken. But when they saw a pack marching free, their eyes widened. And when they saw the human, bloodied but unbowed, leading them, something stirred inside. One by one, chains began to fall. Some predators broke them in rage. Others simply refused to wear them any longer. The fire spread. By midday, the fortress no longer stood as a symbol of control. It was the heart of rebellion. Predators gathered in hundreds, then thousands, their roars joining into a storm. They looked to the human not because they were forced, but because they believed. He had given them back what was stolen, the right to stand tall. The overseer's signal fires burned in the distance, warning the overlords of uprising. The human knew retaliation would come quickly. He turned to the predators, his voice carrying over the restless crowd. "They will come with armies. They will come with fire. They will try to break you again. But you are not the same as before. You are not slaves. You are not beasts. You are hunters. And together we are stronger than they ever imagined." A thunderous roar answered him. It rolled across the land like an earthquake. For the first time, predators did not bow their heads. They lifted them, eyes blazing with pride. That night, as fires lit the fortress walls, the predators stood shoulder to shoulder, guarding their new home. The human watched them quietly. He had not asked to lead. He had not asked to be alpha. Yet here he was, chosen not by command but by trust. In their eyes, he was no longer an outsider. He was part of their pack. Above them, the stars burned bright. Somewhere among those stars, the overlords were already preparing their return. But the predators did not tremble. They were waiting. They were ready. The human clenched his fists, his eyes steady on the horizon. This was not just the freedom of one courtyard. This was the birth of something greater. A pack of predators united under a human alpha. A force that would not bow. The dawn broke, painting the sky in red and gold. The predators lifted their voices in a roar that carried for miles. It was a new sound, one the galaxy had not heard before. The sound of chains falling. The sound of a new order beginning. And it was only the start.